Hi, and thank you for being here today. My name is Rebekah Layton. My pronouns are she and her. And I am here in collaboration with the National Survivor Network, the NSN, which is a program of CAFS, the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. This is going to be a four-part series on community accountability. Part one is core foundations of community accountability. So our agenda for today, I'll introduce myself a little bit and I'm going to go over an I am statement. And that's a really important thing, I think, when we are talking about coming into community and being in community, because it helps us to acknowledge who we are and our autonomy as a person, but also who we are in community, how we expect to be treated by others and how we expect to treat others. It's essentially for me kind of like making an agreement with myself to be authentic to myself and to come into the space intentionally. I don't think that we can truly grow as a community together unless we acknowledge ourselves and who we are and what we bring into that space, as well as how we impact the space we're walking into, whether that's virtually as we are here today or in person. Community takes many, many, many different shapes. And it's very easy to lose sight of what that community's values are and what our own values are. So I think the I am statement is really, really important for me. Then we're going to go over the four parts of the series, just so we have kind of an idea of what we're getting into. And then we're going to talk about harm. And this can be something that's hard for people sometimes because many of us come into space having been harmed by others. Sometimes we're harmed by someone we love, or sometimes we're harmed by someone we don't know. But harm has lasting effects, and harm can take many, many, many different shapes. Once we talk about harm and what harm is in community, we're going to assess how harm impacts community and what accountability within community looks like when harm is caused. Because when we learn how to address conflict in a more positive way, we can actually grow. There can actually be some beauty in conflict because we can learn things about others and ourselves that we may not have ever known. And it actually can help us overcome strife. It can help us grow and be stronger and be more resilient in the future. Now, the outcomes of the harm and how we address the harm is really what determines if we grow as a community and internally and in all of the different ways that we are interrelated, or it can break it down. And so I think it's important for us to talk about how harm happens, what harm does, who's caused harm, and how we address harm, both internally and communally, because that's how we grow. I am Rebekah. I am a survivor. I am a leader. I am a learner. I am in a perpetual state of striving to heal internally and externally. I am a mother. I am an aunt. I am a beautiful individual deserving of love and dignity. I am a community member. I acknowledge that I strive to be intentional and to extend how I hope to be treated into how I treat others. I mess up. I'm human. We're survivors, thrivers. We are human. I want to let this sink in for just a minute before I move forward. I did this before I introduced myself fully, because I think it's really important to remind myself when I come into community who I am, what my values are, and what I expect to get from a community that I'm entering into, but also what I expect to give. Those expectations really determine who we are, how we are, and our autonomy and our communal collective power and action together. So I am Rebekah. I am at the end of my master's degree in restorative justice. And I've really taken time to break down what restorative justice means, not just for me, but what we've learned about restorative justice from communities that have come before us, and what wisdom has been passed down and I've been blessed to learn from others. I come from a space of putting human dignity first and foremost before anything. And I don't always do that right. Sometimes I fail. I fail often. We all fail often. And I think that when we're able to say that, that's how we start to grow together as community. So I come to you in this place as a teacher and as a learner, and really just hoping that we can grow in a community together and learn how to just be, how to be better humans. So this is going to be a 4-part series. The first part is the core foundations to community accountability. Why is community accountability important? Will be part 2. What does taking community accountability look like? And fostering growth and resilience. So those are going to be our 4 parts that we are going to go through this series. Here today, right now in this video, we are going to be going over the core foundations to community accountability. So accountability can look like many things, but it is at its core a state of responsibility for self and for the impact self has on others. Now, one of the things that is really unavoidable when we are coming together in community is harm. Harm happens. Harm can be small, it can be huge, and it really just depends. We also, I think it's important to acknowledge that when we come into community, we come into community with all of ourselves. We bring our history, we bring our values, we bring our worldview, and that can look different for different people. Sometimes we understand where others are coming from, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we think we do, but we really don't. And because of that, because we're all human and because we're all fallible, harm can happen. And harm can be incredibly destructive if it's not handled appropriately, and if it's not handled from a place of understanding. And so I don't think that we can really come together and understand harm unless we talk about it. So what is harm? Harm can mean different things to different people. But it's really important to look at what specifically happened. Was something said that hurt somebody's feelings? Was an action done that went against what was agreed on? Did someone drop the ball? Did someone say a comment that was maybe biased or wrong or hateful? And sometimes harm is intentional and sometimes it's not. But it's really important to look at what specifically that harm was. It could be, I cut you off while I was driving, I didn't mean to, and now you're pissed off for the whole day. Or it could mean, I promised to do this thing, but I didn't do it, or I didn't do it on time. And then that caused problems for the other person, right? That was an agreement that was lost or dropped or broken. And then we have to look at not only what the harm is, who caused the harm, who was harmed, and then what was the impact of that harm? Because if we can break down that harm in a way that we understand it together, we could learn from it. But it's really, really important to go to the beginning. What was the harm? How has the harm impacted self and community and others? Who caused the harm? Who was impacted by the harm? How are they positioned within the community? Who else was impacted directly or indirectly? So sometimes when we harm another, maybe it's an individual, for example, that harm can ripple out and it can impact others. You know, I say something mean to the person who is checking me out at the grocery store, and I don't know what their day's been like, and I'm impatient, and then I go on with my merry day, right? I might not think two things of it. Okay, I'm frustrated, I'm impatient, I'm late, whatever the thing. But now this person who got the brunt of my frustration has to deal with that. And maybe they just got yelled at by their manager, or maybe the customer before them was a jerk, or maybe, something happened before they came to work. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe they were in a wonderful mood. But because I was impatient at the grocery store, now their day feels like it could be ruined, right? Now they could be frustrated with other people, and and it ripples out. It's kind of like the butterfly effect. So we look at who was harmed, what was the harm, who was harmed, and who caused the harm. Who was the responsible party? In this scenario of the grocery store, I would be the responsible party. Now that's a really abstract, like less communal type of example. But what would it look like if I come together with people who trust me with their story, or people who trust me as a mother or a sister or an aunt or chosen family? Okay, and I cause harm to them. Those kinds of harms hurt more often because it comes from someone we trusted. And so I think it's really important when we do mess up is to be responsible for that, to acknowledge that. It's also our job as a community to acknowledge when someone's caused harm to someone else. Because at the end of the day, if we as a community don't support that, don't support the person who's been harmed, community starts to break down, and community becomes responsible for the harm as well. So I think collective action is really like a key component of community accountability. As we talked about, there could be one person who causes harm, but there also can be community that causes harm. And often what we see, especially like in movement building and getting, having a goal that we're all striving for together, we can come to it with different ways of doing it. Like, I think that I've got the right answer. You think you've got the right answer. She thinks she's got the right answer. They think they've got the right answer. He may have his own way of doing things. But how those and coming into a space together, that could actually cause harm, right? Like we could not listen to someone's idea. We could actually lose out on some really awesome ideas because we think we've got it all, or they think they've got it all. So I think it's a matter of coming together and creating community, like a collective action, a collective way to address harm when it happens. And so as a community, we can say, okay, if a harm happens, what do we want to do in response to that harm, for example? So we want to address the harm both individually and collectively as a community. And that's how we start to become accountable for not just ourselves, but for all of those who we're in community with. What needs to happen to address the harm? So what needs to happen in order for repair to start happening? How do we repair the harm that's happened? And it's really, really important to do this from a place of love. Fear breaks down and it leads us to shame. And I think that a lot of us, I know I can say for myself, have had experiences where if we were afraid to address the harm, right? We didn't have community or people that we trusted, and maybe being accountable for our actions actually led to more danger, either real or perceived. And so fear and coming to address harm through a place of fear really breaks down. And it doesn't just break down the person who caused the harm, but it can break down the entire community. So making steps toward repair. First, we address the harm and we agree on how we're going to address the harm as a community. But then we have to actually make steps towards repair once we've addressed and identified all the things, right? We make agreements on collective action. We make agreements on individual action. And again, we avoid shame and blame. And then we work towards community building, holding each other accountable through love, through peace, through grace. So I think at the end of the day, what's really, really important is that we've come to this space of intentionality, right? Many of us who are survivors have survived immense pain and immense harm. We've also figured out how to survive, and we're still here, right? Maybe we haven't overcome everything, and maybe we're in a perpetual state of healing and growing. Maybe we're brand new into this journey of survival, and maybe we're way past survival and we're trying to thrive now. We can do that on our own. We could do that all day long on our own. But what good is that? What good is it to do all these things on our own when we have a community of other survivors and other people and allies and those who want to see us thrive together? But we can't do that if we have not learned what accountability is. And so I think that's really important for us moving forward, especially as we get into the other parts of this series. Within the survivor community over the years, there are people who've been hurt by other survivors. There are people who are coming into this space from very different worldviews, potentially. There are people coming into this space who've been harmed in ways that we'll never know, right? And so I think that when we come into space and place together in community, we can actually look at accountability as a form of love and as a form of embracing and showing respect and saying, I see you, you see me, we see each other. And I think if we see each other, then we can really break down those barriers that cause harm. And that is when we thrive as a community. So I think it's really important to think about accountability, not in this place of like trying to root out who caused harm to who. It's really a way of coming together and saying, this is how we have agreed to be accountable to each other. This is how we've agreed to strive. This is what these are the things that are important to us, right? We come to this space of what is our values. We agree on those values. We agree on being autonomous and being responsible for ourselves while also being part of a community. And when we're part of a community, we have to address harm as it happens, because if we don't address it, people end up on the outliers. People end up feeling like they can't come into community and into space with each other authentically. When we come into space in a place of love, there's no more room for shame. And if there's no room for shame, there's no room for blame. And if there's no room for blame, there's no room for fear. And not only does it become kind of a way of being when we're in an intentional community, but it becomes just a practice. It makes everything make more sense, right? And there's so many things that are out of our control in this world. But what we do have control over is the beauty that our lives have, especially when we're in a chosen community. So I want to say, before we start closing this session out, I think it's really, really beautiful that we've found a community of survivors that are growing and learning from each other, right? It's important to know that, or to remember that people come into community at different stages of their lives, as we've kind of discussed already. And so I think it's important to say that, you know, survivors are just that. We survived. We survived for a reason. We have done what we've had to do to overcome hardship. We have often been conditioned to go it alone. We have often been harmed by those who we've trusted. We have often avoided community because we do not know how to be in community. We are also capable of great empathy. And what could happen if we were to harness that empathy to build in connection and dismantle the fear and shame through accountability, through community accountability? I think that that is how we get to a place of growing and thriving together. It's also how we can get to a place of addressing together harm that has been done to our community. But I don't think that we can get to a place of addressing the harm that's been done to the community of survivors, for example, without first figuring out how we're going to address that harm internally. So I want to leave us with that. I want to leave us with this space of contemplation, thinking, right? Who am I? What I challenge is for each person to come up with their own type of an I am statement. It can be one word, it could be a paragraph, it could be something only you ever see, and it could be something you share with the world. But the point of it is to determine, who am I? Who am I as a person? Who am I in my wholeness and my being? And how am I showing up? How am I showing up in community? And how am I being intentional when I show up? How am I going to be responsible for my actions? And how am I going to address harm if I cause it? I think that asking those questions is incredibly important, not just for really knowing who you are, who I am, who we are, but also how we show up. Because how we show up is going to make an incredible difference on how we learn to grow and trust each other. Once we can learn to grow and trust each other, we can create a foundation where it's okay to mess up, because we know that it's going to be met with love, and we know that it's going to be met with grace, and it's going to be in this place of an opportunity as opposed to a detriment, an opportunity to learn and to grow and to break down the shame that so many of us have endured. So I'm really, really grateful to the National Survivor Network for bringing me in to partake in this conversation with you all. And I really look forward to this journey and this series and discussions around community accountability, collective action, and how we repair when something happens. Not just with a band-aid, but truly repairing together, growing together in this place of chosen community, which is powerful. Thank you.